Hi, this is Jason Lisk with Pool Genius, and welcome to Pool Picks Playbook, episode number 3. In today's episode, we're going to dive into a special type of survivor pool. I know there are a subset of you that play in this pool, so this is right up your alley. We're going to talk about the type of pool where you pick losers instead of winners, where you get to root for teams to continue to stink. In pretty much every other aspect, these are like survivor pools strategically, but the big difference is, of course, because it is picking losers and you still have the constraint that you can pick each team only once, it just drastically changes which teams get picked. There is no really great source of public pick data on these type of pools. Kind of the logic and everything that goes with them, because the pick numbers change and because you're, say, limited to picking the Titans only once or the Raiders only once, that's vastly different than the survivor pool where you pick against those teams every week. So it does change a lot. Because of that, you only get one crack at these bad teams. So instead of picking bad teams to win, sometimes you actually have to pick good teams to lose, which is the polar opposite of a normal survivor pool where you're looking for those spots to use teams. So at Pool Genius, we do not have customized pick advice in our automated survivor pick section for loser pools, and it's because of a lot of those reasons I just talked about. And they're a smaller subset of the overall survivor community, and the changes on the back end to accommodate that would be pretty large. There'd be a lot of work that would have to go into it. It'd be pretty time consuming. And the challenges of not having good pick data would be an issue. But that said, that's why I'm recording this show for you today as part of Pool Picks Playbook, because in Pool Picks Playbook, we want to dive into pools that maybe we want to talk about some strategy that are outside of some of our core products, but we want you to be able to follow along, find things that work for you, jump into our Discord and discuss strategy on them. Whatever you want to do, you can go join that. And so that said, let's talk about key teams for loser pools and how to think about planning out your loser pools down the stretch in the 2025 season. We're going to dive into the weekly results of the last 6 weeks here. We are going to delve into which teams you're going to want to save. But before I do that, real quick, if you like this topic, hit like and subscribe. It really helps us out. We want to provide you with episodes that you're interested in. We want to find the episodes that people want to see and that other people aren't talking about for them. Because we know there is a passionate group of you that really loves to pick losers. So let us hear about it in the comments and like and subscribe. And now let's go forward with our loser pick analysis. So first I want to start by talking a little bit about how I'm going to analyze these teams and kind of come up with a list of teams that have the best loser value going forward. So let's jump in. I'm going to walk you through my process. I am recording this on the Monday before Thanksgiving. I've gone through the numbers this morning. We've looked at the results from Sunday. We've got the early lines for Thanksgiving week 13, but there's still some news out there. So these numbers could still change this week even, but I'm going to go forward with this video. One big one being, we still don't know fully about Baker Mayfield. We haven't heard official confirmation on some other quarterbacks this week. We just got some news that I'm going to talk about in the Minnesota situation. That'll be important this week, but there's lots of things that could change. So as always, these videos are to hopefully provide you with some strategy thoughts and context. But for the latest news, check our product. It's going to have updated numbers. Now I'm going to pull up for you our data grid for this week, and I've already got it set to what we call the season view tab here. So I've clicked to the season view tab. I'm going to enlarge it over on so we can see more of these teams here with weeks 12 through 18. So I bring this up because here's how I would think about thinking through the future and planning out even a loser pool. And this is an example where you can use our existing tools, even though we aren't providing you with specific customized pick advice of here's the team we think's the best pick for you. You can still use the tools for a loser pool. You can use our win odds, which you just convert to loss odds for teams. And so let's talk through the steps that I do to kind of set this value. Well, first I want to go through here and sort some things for you. So like this is week 12. You can see that's Baltimore, Detroit. Those are our winners. If you want to go the opposite, if you double click on those columns, you're going to get that sorted by the team's win odds. And so their win odds are simply the inverse of their loss odds. So like if the Jets have 11% win odds, their loss odds are 89%. So you would just take a look there, and you could sort that through any week to see which teams we have as the most likely to lose. Okay. But let's go through my process for how I'm going to look at these teams. Let's pull up this graphic, and I'm going to talk through how I'm going to proceed here. So the first thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it, by looking through our data grid like I had just shown you, is I'm going to identify the teams who have the top loss odds each week by sorting by that lowest win percentage. And I'm going to subtract from one what I just talked about. You can either copy and paste our data grid into a spreadsheet. You can move the data there. You can type it in. You can paste it and format it, however you want to do that. But I'm identifying the top teams. I'm pulling the top 5 teams by loss odds for each week. And then for me, what I'm doing is I'm also pulling every team within 5% of the 5th team. So, for example, in week 13, the 5th team is a tie. There's a bunch of teams with 25% win odds, so 75% loss odds. Chicago, Cleveland, Washington, as of right now. So I want to pull every team that is at 70%, right? I don't want to go get too risky in weeks when there's already 5 other options and hopefully at least one that you have available. But I'm gonna add 5% on there, and that gets me down. I'm adding in, for example, week 13, Tennessee against Jacksonville, Cincinnati against Baltimore, right? And so that's kind of step 2. Step 3 is I'm going to convert those to a numerical scale. Now this can be any scale you want. All that matters is consistency here. Here's what I do. So I want to make sure every team I just polled in step 2 gets at least a point in my system. And so I'm going to, if the number was 70% that week, if that was my last number, my top 5, my 5th team minus 5 is 70%. I'm going to put my baseline at 69%, and the 70% is going to get 1 point. 75 is going to get 6, 75% minus 69%. So I'm just going to subtract across all my numbers, and that's the numerical scale I'm going to assign for that week to those teams. So like doing that for week 13, Carolina has 82% loss odds. That's a 13, right? And so I do that across all 6 remaining weeks, and I get those numbers. And so then I have a bunch of numerical numbers that are just converting for me, and you can do it however you want, but I'm converting. So I'm translating those percentages into a number, just a base number. Then step 4, I'm going to sum all those numbers for a particular week. So all the teams I've identified as possible plays that week as being in the range of being played, I'm going to add them all up. And then that gives me my total loser score for that week, because not every week's going to be the same. Here's the thing. As we know, looking through Survivor weeks, there's going to be some weeks where it's going to be fairly bunched up, where there's not much difference between the top options and like the 5th or 6th. And so that individual loser number is not going to be all that different for a bunch of teams, and the total may be low. But then there's going to be some other weeks where you got a couple big favorites that are way higher than the other options. They're going to have a much higher number, or they're going to attribute a much higher number. And so the total number may be higher as well. So summing all that, I'm getting different scores for each week. That tells me which weeks are tougher relatively or not. Then in step 5, I'm going to divide each team's individual number by that total weekly number I got in step 4. And that's going to give me like a loss share percentage number, right? So for example, if the team I was looking at was 20% higher, let's say they were 85% to win and my baseline was 65, 20 points higher, and the total loser score for all teams that week was 80. Well, they're getting 25% loss share. So they're counting for 25% loss share. Now, I individually like to convert that. I'm in step 6, I multiply that by a total score. So that number can be whatever you want, whatever looks good to your brain. Like I do a nice round 10. So my 25% loss share gets a 2.5 score. But you can do it however you want. If you want smaller percentages, you can do that. And here's the thing I would do with that in step 6. And this is individual to your pool. Get that total score, and then you can weight each week as you think necessary for your pool. Because some of you may be in a pool that's almost done. And so you don't want to wait week 17, week 16 as heavily as you do 13, 14. But that's up to you. You can weight it however you want. So you can assign different weights to each week. Like for me, as I'm getting ready to show you the result of all this for 2025 of me doing this process. I use the same weight on every week except week 18, and I made week 18 worth half. And that's because there's just more uncertainty in week 18. But I'm trying to provide future value for a pool that's probably getting to the end. So I'm going to give you numbers for how I think teams should rank based on getting to the end of the season. So that's where this next graphic comes up. This is my list. This is the result of what I just talked about, going through all that process, adding up these numbers. And these are my loser future value rankings from weeks 13 through 18 in a loser pool of the teams that I would think would be most desirable to have based on their upcoming matchups, projected odds, etc. Number 1, Las Vegas. Las Vegas, the only team that shows up here in 5 different weeks as an option. Right behind them, Tennessee also comes up in a couple of key weeks and 4 total weeks. And then we have a bit more of a drop off when we get down to a next tier. The Jets, Atlanta, and Carolina all could be big picks. And then another teardrop, Cleveland, Chicago, and New Orleans, followed by Arizona, Washington, Cincinnati, and close behind them, Minnesota and Pittsburgh. And then you get a teardrop to the Giants. And then there's really no other team beyond the Giants. There are teams that show up at low value as contrarian type picks, as the type of teams that will maybe be in play to be picked by somebody. These are teams like the Chargers at the Chiefs, or, when we find another example here from week 14. So like maybe Pittsburgh. Well, Pittsburgh was on the list. So Dallas and Minnesota, Detroit against the Rams, when the Rams are at home against Detroit. That's a riskier pick. But these teams don't make the list. They're there, and they're probably available to most people. But this is the top 14. This is the 14 that came out of my numbers. And you can see there's a pretty big drop-off. Now, what I'll say about this list, obviously, if you've been playing in a loser pool, some of the usual suspects are showing up here, right? I would think in most loser pools, Las Vegas, Tennessee, the Jets, New Orleans, and the Giants have probably been heavily used. Maybe some Carolina, though they have won games that people have probably tried to pick against them. And same with Cleveland. And so those top 3 on my list of future value teams are also probably largely unavailable because they've been the types of teams that people have been trying to pick against. But we'll talk about them here in a second and where to think about using them. So that's where I'm going to go next, is translating this overall list. So what I would do if I were you and you're playing a loser pool, look at how many of these teams you have. Look at how many picks you have left to make. Because obviously if there's 6 weeks left and you only have to make 1 pick, If you've got 6 teams on this list, you probably don't have to get riskier than that. You can carve a path through the rest of the season and make it work. And so when we in our next segment, I'm going to break down some individual weeks and think about where to use teams. So let's turn to, we'll go through with week 13 to start, and I'm going to work my way forward through the rest of this year's schedule, talking about these loser teams, the loser future value, and who you might want to consider as you map out the rest of your season. So I am going to pull up, and this is a really cool feature that we just introduced. I'm going to pull our data grid back up to talk about this. Just a couple weeks ago, we just introduced not only the current week and being able to look at the season view from the current week, but you can also click into individual weeks. So I'm going to click into week 13 so we can see it here nice and big with our projections for week 13. And then I'm going to go into 14. I'm going to show you all the future weeks, and we'll sort by loss odds, right? We can sort by our Pool Genius loss odds. So here's the teams with the lowest odds to win and thus the highest odds to lose as we're looking at week 13. Now, the things I would point out here, the two biggest non-favorites are Minnesota now and Carolina. That Rams line has moved with how good the Rams have looked. And that Minnesota-Seattle line, just in the last hour or so, we got news that J.J. McCarthy is in concussion protocol, reported symptoms on his way back. He's not looked good. The line's not moved a ton, but it looks like we may be getting Max Brosmer in this matchup against last year's quarterback for Minnesota, Sam Darnold, and the Seattle Seahawks. So we've got 2 10-point dogs on the board for your loser consideration here. And I think Minnesota is going to be pretty popular. You have to weigh that, but their win odds are high enough you obviously can still consider them. The other team I want to highlight here, as we look down this list, the Giants, I know they're not available to a lot of you, but if they are available to any of you, you really probably should strongly consider them. And I say that because after this week, their schedule, I'm going to click through to the season view again and just look at the Giants line. Giants line's right here, the fourth line down. 12% this week to win it. Or I'm sorry, 22% this week to win in week 13 against the Patriots on the road. Then they have their bye. So if you want to pull just down to the end, they're going to be on their bye in 14. And then they play Washington at home, Minnesota at home, at Las Vegas, and then Dallas at home in that unpredictable week 18. So honestly, the Giants' schedule shapes up where after this week, they're done with the toughest part. So if you have them at really low ownership, they're probably the one team to consider if you want to come off of Minnesota. Now, I would look at, going back to the week view, this Carolina team. I disregard that future value column because that's for normal survivor pools. Carolina has high future value in survivor pools, and we'll get to them again in a minute. So if you have one of these other two options, I'm probably thinking about saving Carolina, especially if I don't have other good options in week 17. So check what you have in week 17 because they could be a lower owned option. It's still high EV that week. Once you get outside that group of three, and I'm pulling Vegas back here because I do also think they have future value. We're going to get to them in a second. I would have Minnesota or the Giants as my top two. I would have Carolina and Vegas as, really good picks in a vacuum. But if my entry needs them for some of these future weeks, you might want to see if you have other options. And then I think you get Chicago and you get the variation on Washington. And what I say by that is we don't know the Jaden Daniels situation. They could have no future value or they could have like really high future value in loser pools. If Daniels isn't back, they become in play in some of these future weeks more so. And so they're kind of an in-between type pick. So that's how I look at week 13. If we look ahead to week 14 in loser pools, and I'm going to sort again, we don't have betting on. So these are now based on My view of the betting market, where things have gone so far in 13, we're in 12. Our power ratings changes, and the news. So I'm going to sort by loss odds. I still have New Orleans against Tampa as the highest loss odds. Now, this is obviously very, very up in the air with the Baker Mayfield news on his shoulder. And as I record this, we haven't heard any official word on whether he's completely out. We've seen line movement that I think is accounting for the risk that he is out in week 13. But this is week 14. And so we would have to hear that he's out not only this week, but multiple weeks. So this number could still be up in the air. This number that I'm giving you is kind of a split number with some risk that he doesn't play, but also that he does. And so I could see this number going both up or down. And so New Orleans will be the biggest loser odds in week 14 if Mayfield plays. They might fall into that tier around Arizona, Chicago if he does not. I mean, the Saints are still power rated way below the Bucs. And even with a drop off for Teddy Bridgewater, the Bucs are going to be favored by a decent amount at home. And so, but this week gets a lot trickier if Mayfield's out. This is a case where it's very unlike regular survivor pools. In regular survivor pools, people have been picking against the Saints, but they can still do it. And the Bucs have not really been picked. So they can pick the Bucs, and if Mayfield is healthy, that's going to be a big factor, and he could get really juiced up in popularity. I don't think that is probably the case in survivor and loser pools. And that's because I expect the Saints have been used, back when they played the Bills and in other spots. They're probably one of the 5 most used teams. And so if you do have them at low ownership, I think you're rooting for Mayfield to play that week and get good news. And so you can just fire away on a relatively low owned and really high lose odds spot. If he's not available, that week gets pretty dicey. Chicago's in play. Cincinnati's in play. Maybe the last spot to use Cincinnati, but we don't know Burrow's situation, so this number could change. Atlanta, it's a pretty good spot in a vacuum, but again, look at that week 17 week for you, because I think Atlanta is a higher value play in 17 in a week that's going to be really tough when they host the Rams. And we're going to get to week 17 here in a bit. So I think Atlanta, if you recall back, were in my top 5. They were 4th in future loss value. And some of that is this week, but a big chunk of it is in 17. So keep that in mind. In week 15, we'll look ahead at our loss value numbers. Now, this is one, and I'm going to talk about week 15 and 16 together, and I'm going to flip back and forth between these weeks. I'll show you real quick. Week 15, we got Las Vegas, Tennessee, and the Jets, all with under 20% win odds, meaning their loss odds are over 80%. When I click on 16, I have Tennessee and Las Vegas, the only 2 teams, 20%, 19% to win. So loss odds of 80% or better. So when we look at week 15 and 16, things could really bottleneck here in loser pools. And if you have one of Tennessee or Las Vegas available, I think this is the weeks you're looking to use them. Is if you have one of these. And if you have the Jets also, you're in great shape, because you probably want the Jets in 15. So then you can carry Las Vegas and Tennessee to 16. But I know these are going to be relatively low available teams. So a lot of people aren't going to have them. And it's going to get tough. Week 15 and 16 get pretty tough once you get past Las Vegas, Tennessee, and the Jets, the 3 most highest loser value teams on my list. So if you have to get past them, I mean, you're probably looking at something like Arizona against Houston in 15. You're looking at maybe the Chargers on the road at Arrowhead. There's a lot of risk here. Cleveland might be available. So I would expect we could get a concentration on teams like the Chargers that week, or a Miami, or a Minnesota at Dallas, depending on where this quarterback situation is. That number is where we are now. But I mean, we could see Minnesota really going in the tank down the stretch based on how this quarterback situation has gone. So that one's lurking, but tough week in 15. 16 the same way. If you're looking at loss odds, Pittsburgh pops up, Cleveland pops up, Washington pops up. I talked about the Daniels thing. So that's a variable spot. I think if Daniels is out, Washington is very live as an option in week 16 against the Eagles. And then maybe San Francisco on the road at the Colts as not the type of pick you're crazy to make or you're dying to make, but one you might have to make in certain types of pools. And that brings us to 17. And I've talked about 17 for a bit here, and I've mentioned it in relation to other teams, and here's why. Atlanta has the highest loss odds. It's a tough week. If you can save Atlanta for 17, that's the spot I think you want to use them against the Rams. Rams are not as likely to be resting starters in 17. Clearly could in 18. They are now looking like the favorite for the 1 seed in the NFC, but that might be the week they need to win to clinch it, to seal it up, the advantage against the Eagles, who do have the tiebreaker over them. And so that Atlanta spot is probably like the highest value play on the board. And if you can save Atlanta for 17, do it. The other two there are Carolina, who I mentioned as a possible save. I don't think you need to save both Carolina and Atlanta, but if you probably want one of them because you're less likely to have the Jets available to you. Once you get past those three, and this is why it's such a high value loser week to have Atlanta or Carolina, it gets really dicey. Chicago at San Francisco, Jacksonville on the road at Indy, Denver at KC. Again, we see that Minnesota potential, which could pop up. So lots of risk there in 17. I'm not really going to go through 18. I'm just going to quickly flash it. It's the usual suspects. It's the teams we've talked about. But the thing about week 17 is that's a week where, you're going to get resting starters, different motivations. I think you get to 18, you're happy in a loser pool, and you can figure out who to pick against. I mean, you wouldn't have projected you were picking against the Chiefs last year, but by kickoff in week 18, they clinched the 1 seed. They weren't playing anybody, and they were a 10-point dog at Denver. And so I think it's a week you can come up with a pick based on motivations, injuries, and but I'm probably planning for that 17 spot if I'm in a big enough pool to get there, because that's probably going to be the decision point and the week where you can make a big move against people who are really struggling to find a pick. So thanks again, and hopefully you found this really useful. And if you are a subscriber to Pool Genius, this is your reminder to check each week and see where these odds are. You can do the same process I went through. You can sort by these win odds and these loss odds and update each week with your strategy and see where things have shifted. So, I work and update these numbers regularly throughout the week, starting on typically most Tuesdays. I did a little early on Thanksgiving week because we have big games coming up pretty quickly. But in most weeks, I'll do this on Tuesday and run through. And so you'll get those updated numbers when the product opens up on Tuesday. So check in, and that'll help you. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, again, like and subscribe. Tell us in the comments what you thought, what else you want to see, and good luck out there finding some losers.